This is the Humans of Gaming podcast, an open and honest conversation about games, life, and belief.
Hello and welcome to Humans of Gaming. I'm Drew Dixon. I am the Chief Content Nerd at Love Thy Nerd, and I'm joined by our Chief Executive Nerd, Chris Gwaltney. Hey, Chris.
Hey, what's up? I'm here.
Nothing much, man.
We're going to do this thing.
We are. Have you started Dark Souls 2 yet?
You know, actually, I did. Me and Ryan started it last night, and I guess I didn't realize, because I've only played Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne, and doing, co-op in that or multiplayer stuff is...
Oh, so you guys
easy.
are doing doing
we're
co-op.
gonna co-op together, but it's a little bit more of a pain to do in Dark Souls 2. The first thing you get, it only lets you co-op for 12 and a half minutes, and then it sends you back, and so then you have to summon them again. But then eventually you get one that'll they'll stick around until you kill a boss or whatever. So we're just trying to get through all the intro stuff so we can get to that point.
I'm guessing it's a lot less intimidating playing that way.
I mean, we haven't gotten to that point yet, but I'm sure it is. Honestly, I'm a little underwhelmed, at least from the initial. I mean, I've only played for an hour or something, but I mean, maybe I'm just really good at Dark Souls now, but it's just been really easy. I haven't felt oh man, I'm going to die any minute.
That's the whole
I just
point.
must have
You play
gotten
Dark
good.
Souls, so yeah, or maybe that's it. Well, keep me updated.
Yeah, I'll keep
I'm
you
interested
posted.
to hear how that goes. Well, we have two very special guests on the podcast, and they are from Game to Grow, and they're both named Adam. Hey, Adams.
Hi. Hello. How's it going?
So we have Adam Davis. Why don't you say hello so we can try to distinguish the voices of the Adams
I am
here?
Adam Davis. Adam Prime.
Oh,
And you
shots
are
fired.
the executive director of Game to Grow, is that right?
I am an executive director of Game to Grow.
And you're both executive directors. Okay, that makes it even harder. And then Adam Johns is also with us. Hey, Adam.
I'm Adam Johns, or Adam 2.0.
There it is.
Oh, wow. That's a strong
Maybe one of you
statement
just needs to speak with an accent the whole time.
So I could do an accent, but it has a strong possibility of offending somebody.
Oh, great. Okay, let's stay with it.
My accents always end up sort of asymptotically ending up at a pirate.
Yeah.
Oh,
We can start at
Oh,
pirate,
there you go.
but then it turns into an Irish accent. So.
Pirate or...
Pirate wouldn't offend anybody, I don't think.
No, that's the safe one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So where are you guys from? Because I don't sense an accent in either of you.
Well, funny you should say that. I Adam Davis. I'm actually from Texas.
Okay.
As most Texans always say, they're from Texas, even though they've been out of Texas for a long time. I've lived in Washington since 2003. So
Okay.
I'm still a Texan, though. All Texans will always be from Texas.
And he can do
Yeah.
a great Texan.
I can.
when they,
What part of Texas
I'm
did
from
you grow up in?
San Antonio.
Oh, okay. So you and I met at PAX South. So you were just in your old stomping grounds.
I was in my old stomping ground. I was in the place of cheese and just the best Tex-Mex, and that's part of the reason why I go back to PAX South every year. There's all this great stuff we do with our nonprofit organization. I also secretly love Tex-Mex. Not so secretly. It's not a
much
secret.
of a secret.
Yeah,
it's not now.
I actually have lots of Tex-Mex T-shirts that I wear with pride.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I grew up in Amarillo, Texas. So, but Amarillo kind of has almost a New Mexico vibe to its Mexican food. So it's a little different from San Antonio, but I love Tex-Mex. So I enjoyed some of it while we were there.
I would say it is a gift from the heavens.
I
agree.
didn't know breakfast tacos were a thing until I went to San Antonio.
Breakfast tacos
Is that a thing in other places, or is that just is that a San Antonio thing?
It's not. I don't know if it started in San Antonio, but it's definitely a San Antonio thing. San Antonio is known for its breakfast tacos. I also lived a portion of my life in Harlingen, Texas, in the very, very tip of Texas, and I also have family in Lubbock, Texas, and in Dallas, and in Waco, or near Waco. So I have family all over Texas, and I can sort of describe the differences in the regional Tex-Mex.
Yeah.
But that's not why we're on this podcast.
Well, it
That'll be
is now, so let's get
on.
going.
I'll talk all about the regional Texas varieties of Tex-Mex.
There you go. And Adam 2.0, where are you from?
I was born just outside of Philadelphia in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
But I mostly grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona.
Okay.
Ooh, I love Flagstaff.
Or something. Flagstaff's an absolutely beautiful place.
Yeah.
I would live in Flagstaff now if it basically would be not a dead end to my career.
Yeah, my wife and I were
That's
just
fair.
there last fall. We went through Flagstaff. So we did we had our 10th anniversary kind of trip thing. So we went to Las Vegas, then we went to Zion National Park in Utah.
It's gorgeous. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we went to Bryce Canyon, and then we went down into Arizona and went to Antelope Canyon, which is kind of northern Arizona.
Yeah.
You know where Horseshoe Bend is?
Yes, I think so. You're not,
So
not
Antelope
too far from
Canyon's
the painted desert, right?
Right. Yep. And so Antelope Canyon is like this world-class slot canyon with all these crazy formations and stuff. And then we drove to Flagstaff and stayed a night there and did all that stuff. So
It's a wonderful place. I really loved growing up in Flagstaff. I did a lot of snowboarding and outdoor stuff, and we lived literally like a block away from a national forest parkland. So we did a lot of cool hiking, and it was a beautiful and wonderful place to grow up.
It was like an hour from the Grand Canyon.
Yeah, I've been to the Grand Canyon enough times now that I can just call it a big hole in the ground.
It's not so bad.
It's a canyon.
We just call it the canyon. Just call it the canyon.
I've seen grander canyon.
Yeah, no, that part I think that part of the country is just a gift, man. It's so beautiful. So
yeah,
I'm jealous that you got to live there for a while. It's funny how wherever you live, it just becomes kind of commonplace to you. You know,
it's true, and there's lots of the stuff that we talk about this living in Seattle, where Adam and I now live, and we don't really do any touristy things that we probably could do. Like, there's lots of cool stuff to do in Seattle that we just don't do because we live here.
Right. Yeah, Seattle's a fun place too. It's super touristy, but if you ever, since you don't do touristy stuff in your own city, there is a touristy thing that I did there that I really enjoyed. Have you done the Underground Seattle tour?
I actually know one of the tour guides for the Underground Seattle tour. So that actually one of the things I have done, but only because I actually know somebody who runs the tour.
What did you think of it?
It's super fun. It's a really interesting. People used to say Seattle is literally built on top of another city, and I thought they were misusing literally. And they are not. Right. It actually is built on top of another city, which is crazy.
Yeah.
It's like one of the most D&D things.
Yeah, it's
I think any city can lay claim to. There's like an entire sunken city below this city.
You know what? You could. This would be a way to make a ton of money. So
write this down.
Your friend. Yeah, write this down. Get your friend who's a tour guide for the Underground Seattle, and do exclusive D&D games in the underground part of Seattle.
That's a really super good idea.
Yeah, you have to cut that out of the episode now because you shared this really great idea with the world.
Yeah. That's right.
I've got to capitalize on this before this episode airs.
That's what I said. Write it down.
Right.
There's an organization called True Dungeon. They were actually at PAX South, and they do these sort of combination live action walk through dungeons with very sort of D&D-esque mechanics and things that you go through. Man, how cool would that be to do a true dungeon game in the underground?
Oh, man.
Let's go, make it happen.
I might be able to help make that happen.
Yeah. I mean, a tour guide. That's all you need to do.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's where you have a leg up on everybody else who try to do this. A tour guide. A guy, so you're good.
It's all about knowing the right people.
Sometimes that's all it takes.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, so tell us about Game to Grow.
So Game to Grow is a 501c3 nonprofit that's dedicated to using games of all kinds for therapeutic, educational, and community growth. Most primarily, what we do is we use the game of Dungeons and Dragons to help kids and teens build social skills. So we see about 40 kids and teens each week, helping them to overcome challenges related to autism and anxiety and ADHD and depression by intentionally facilitating the game of Dungeons and Dragons to help them become more confident, creative, and socially capable people.
We started Game to Grow in 2017, but Adam and I have actually been using role-playing games to help kids for just about 8 years now. And we've seen through all of those years just how much we can help kids grow by seeing themselves as the hero that their character is and translating some of that confidence and those social abilities back into their real life.
That's really cool. Where did this idea come from? Like, when did you go, like, we could totally use this to, like,
yeah, we discovered it largely by accident, and then we, like everybody who uses role-playing games in an intentional way, thought we invented it and thought we were brilliant. So we're not the first ones to have done this. It just turns out that people who have been doing this for years and years haven't quite had the opportunity that we have to talk about it. So we started, like I said, right around 2011. So I was in grad school at the time and was getting some volunteer hours and getting some side gigs who were in the field that I was studying. And at the time I was studying drama therapy. I ended up with a degree with a master's in education and a specialization in drama therapy. But I was studying drama therapy and I was getting my volunteer hours. And then I had somebody ask me if I was a dungeon master because there was a sort of an after school program where kids who needed a little social support, who were having some trouble fitting in at school, could go to this sort of open Dungeons and Dragons group and play D&D. So I was hired on as a facilitator. And when I first came onto this group, it was largely unstructured. It was basically like any kind of game you'd see at a board game store or, in a library or something like that. The kids were game mastering for each other largely, and they were enjoying themselves, and it was an opportunity for them to connect about a shared interest for a lot of kids who were really struggling at school. But then I started being the game master, and saw that I could translate.
So before this, did you have like a background in Dungeons and Dragons? Like, had you played?
Yes.
Before?
I started playing in middle school originally, and like my middle school experience was like a lot of middle school kids' experiences, awful. So,
not the Dungeons and Dragons experience.
No,
just the
my middle school experience.
Yeah.
I really had a tough time in middle school. I was kind of a big kid who got bullied a bit, and I really enjoyed Dungeons and Dragons as a way to like feel like I belonged someplace, to have a team, and not only that, but I could also like make the character that I aspired to be. So my character was charismatic when I wasn't, and my character was dexterous when I wasn't. So I played a lot in middle school, and then less in high school, and then not at all in college. And then after I got out of college, before I got into grad school, I had a group of friends that I like randomly met at a bar, who we like all shared this sort of geeky history. So we started playing again, and then pretty much from 2008 until like well into 2012, I think we were playing like once a week with the same characters. And so I got back into it around that time.
Did you quit because you like thought it was nerdy or geeky or whatever?
No, I think
because you said you quit like during high school, kind of, or fell out of practice as much in high school.
Yeah, it was largely because the game master that we had went to a different high school than I did. So it just sort of I never game mastered back in middle school. I was a player. I would write stories. I would like write basically fan fiction from my character. But I never got into game mastering. So when I started high school, I was in a very different social group, and I took me a long time to get back into it. And it wasn't until after college that I got back into it. And then I realized with studying drama, I became an actor in college, and for several years after that, I was in a lot of the fringe theater scene around the Seattle theater scene. So I was pretty busy with that too. Like every night after work, I would go to rehearsal. So I didn't have a lot of time to do really anything besides work and theater. So then after that sort of slowed down, I built D&D back into my lifestyle.
So Adam approached me during grad school. So Adam and I actually went to the same grad school. That was Antioch University, Seattle. And I was in a counseling program, a marriage and family therapy program. And Adam was, like you said, he was getting his degree in education with an emphasis in drama therapy. And so he came up to me after a class. We did a sort of cultural presentation class where we talked about our like personal cultures that we belong to. And Adam and I both presented about being a little bit of a geek. I think we might have both had dice in our presentation in one form or another. And he came up to me after the class, and he had just lost his co-facilitator for the group. And he said, "Hey, do you want to come and play Dungeons and Dragons and get paid to play it with socially awkward kids?" And I said, "Yeah, that sounds like a
dream job. Sign me up."
Yeah, that was basically my response.
Yeah, it was. I wasn't that worried that he was going to say no.
Yeah,
pretty much.
Seemed like a given. Yeah. So we came in and so this is just something that's true for Seattle. We were running the groups on the east side of Seattle, but our school and we lived on the west side of Seattle. That meant that we had to cross bridges and a large body of water. Traffic in Seattle is not great. Mm-hmm. And so Adam and I, in order to avoid traffic, we would go several hours before the group started and sit in a coffee shop and plan for our groups. And what we discovered as we started getting into this is there was a lot of opportunity to really start incorporating a lot of intentionality into the game of Dungeons and Dragons, into how we were running it, especially as the dungeon masters.
And at the time, right before we were running the Dungeons and Dragons group, the sort of other group that we were running was an improv group. And it was really easy to consider how there was almost a one-to-one translation between an improv game that we were leading for these kids that were in our group and the sort of skill we were trying to get them to incorporate. A game focuses on eye contact or body awareness and really direct one-to-one translation. So then we started thinking about Dungeons and Dragons in the same way, and we could use the Dungeons and Dragons story as a way to incorporate, not quite with the same degree of one-to-one, but we could start building very specific real-world areas of social growth into the story scenarios that the kids could have. So we would build frustration tolerance by putting their characters through a situation that was really, really challenging, or help them build their theory of mind skills through having them have to think about their character knowledge versus player knowledge. There's so many things we were realizing off the bat that we were getting started with.
One of the things that that we really noticed very early on was the opportunity to help characters and players really understand their connection with each other, and to play around with that as a dungeon master.
One of the things that I noticed, and I said earlier, is that like when I was a kid, I played very specific kinds of characters because I was in a particular place in my life, and I wanted to see through my character's eyes, and more importantly, see myself through my character's eyes. So one of the things we saw like right out of the gate was a lot of kids, especially the kids we were working with, and I think everybody does this. We play characters for a reason. And oftentimes we have this theory now that people play the character that they need to play. So we have a lot of kids even now who are choosing characters that either are extended versions of themselves, or they are what we call aspirational selves. As an example, really early on, we had a player who was like really, really shy, and they barely spoke above a whisper. And then they would, like, their character that they chose was a dwarf barbarian who is very unapologetic. And you can kind of see like right away that that's somebody who's wanting to play with how much space they take up and what volume they speak at and things like that. So then my job as the game master is to set them up to play with the dwarf barbarian as a way of experimenting and playing with what it feels like to take up space and be unapologetic.
So, I'm curious, like, what is the response been to, like, can you give us like some maybe one or two of the best stories of like ways playing Dungeons and Dragons with awkward, you said awkward teenagers, high school, middle school?
Yeah, mostly it's a lot of middle school age. Like Adam mentioned before, middle school is pretty horrible. So
okay, right, yeah. So I'm just curious if you have like a couple of what were some of the best stories.
Absolutely, we have a lot of stories.
So it really there's been so many years now that we've seen lots of kids push themselves to the point where they grow tremendously. And we don't do like very analytical intake assessments that then we do like intake outtake assessments or things like that. So mostly what we base our success criteria on are parents. Parents' testimonials, parents' responses, and also we have kids that come back again and again. And a lot of our players have been in therapy for most of their lives, and they've grown to hate therapy, and they don't ever want to go to therapy, but they'll like be really excited to come to a social group. And a lot of social skills groups are like direct instruction, and ours is not. Ours is very play based. So a lot of kids are sometimes like having fun for the first time. So we have parents say stuff like that our group is the only time their kid looks forward to leaving the house, and in some cases is the only time they do leave the house. We have some of our players don't spend a full day at school. They have enough anxiety and depression that they have IEPs at school, so they don't spend a full day at school, or they spend a lot of the school day in like a degree of seclusion. And we had a summer camp this summer where some of those players participants who don't spend a full day at school were able to spend an entire day at summer camp for 4 days in a row, which is a huge sign of success and growth for those kids.
Just thinking about like some of the spectacular kind of moments and stories. This is actually an older one, but early on in our groups, we had a very classic, what I like to call the tavern start. Basically, everybody coming into the tavern and getting to meet each other's characters in the tavern setting. And in this particular case, the tavern had a chest at the very front of the tavern that the characters had to put their weapons into, so they're not walking around the whole tavern carrying weapons. And then it would magically seal. And all the characters came in. We had everybody describe and chat with the tavern keeper. In our games, we don't have any alcohol. And so instead, everybody drinks frothy golden soup from mugs. So they all chatted with the soup maven tavern keeper and got their frothy golden mugs of soup. And then they were sitting down, and all of a sudden the tavern became attacked as skeletons burst from the ground and from the walls and started attacking the patrons and the players. And we went around the group and basically said, what do you do to respond to these skeletons? And some people cast magic spells, and some people like picked up furniture and hit skeletons with it. And it came around to one player who held up his arms, looking at sort of the inside of his forearms, and he said, I summon my weapons to myself. And he had designed his character with runic tattoos on the inside of his arms, which he could activate in order to summon his weapons to his hands. And I said, it doesn't work. They're magically sealed in the chest. And the player clenched his fists, and he started to get kind of red in the face, and he started to speak in very short breaths. And he said, if I can't summon my weapons to myself, then my character is pointless. Then what am I doing? Why did I even make the character this way? What was the point of this? He started to get really upset. And Adam Davis turned to him and he said, yeah, your character is really angry. What does he do next? And the color came back into the player's face, and he unclenched his fist, and he said, he rips the arms off the skeleton in front of him and starts hitting him with his own arms. And I said, yes, absolutely. You take the arms of the skeleton and you beat him into re-death with his own arms. And we use that as a purposeful technique, as a way to help the player be able to put the challenges that they have onto their character. And it gives them an opportunity to have some distance from it, an opportunity to have their character be the one that's struggling through a challenge rather than themselves. So they're not so overwhelmed by it.
We see a lot of players, and I can say this again and again, play the character that they need to play. In that case, that was a person who was playing this character who was very powerful because they wanted to feel powerful. That was a thing. They homebrewed these magic runic tattoos. So we see,
which is a pretty common theme. The need for power is a very common theme within.
Yeah. And we also see players that make sort of extended versions of themselves, and including a lot of the sort of maladaptive habits and sort of antisocial behaviors. So we had a player who came in just very openly talking about anxiety and depression and seclusion and isolation. And the character that this player had chosen to play was modeled after the video game Franbo. Even stole the name Franbo from the video game. And in that video game, Franbo is a 11-year-old girl in an insane asylum that has visions that everyone thinks is crazy, and that has a talking cat that only she can hear. So this player had chosen an avatar, if you will, that very much represented the kinds of struggles that they were dealing with in their real life. And that, of course, meant that player, the character, really struggled as much as the player did, fitting in and interacting with the adventuring team. And over time, the player, through the character, got an opportunity to see what it feels like to be included, and everybody else was excited that Franbo was there, and Franbo was talking in a kind of British accent. And in the story, we had this storyline where they had to go speak to the last remaining Dracolich to get its help to fight back against the reemergence of the Age of Green, where the plants are going to take over the world. And I had sort of designed this encounter as sort of a deal with the devil, where they were going to have to make a tough decision and ally with someone they wouldn't otherwise ally with in order to save the world. But they asked the Dracolich for his help, and the Dracolich said, "Why should I help you? I am the last of my kind, and I have no friends and no family and no kin." And this player who is playing Franbo said, "Yeah, I know how you feel. I have no friends also, and it's really lonely." And the Dracolich, who I had sort of designed as a bad guy, became an ally. They were connected on this emotional experience of not having friends. And so they ended up helping the Dracolich make more Dracolich babies by poisoning the nest of a dragon. And it became a redemptive story where the Dracolich got to be reconnected, and through that, that player got to see themselves in this ancient evil Dracolich. But really, it was a very human experience that they were sharing. And then over time, that player who was playing Franbo, the next character that they played was a mobster who was always connected to the mafia.
I first thought you said a lobster.
Oh, no. That's not unusual for some of our players to make totally outlandish things. But in this case, a mobster, a member of the mafia. Yeah. And so this player who had chosen a very antisocial character now chose a hyper-social character who had always had built into his backstory that he had a device that could summon members of the mafia at any time. And these were all NPCs that I had to play. So over time, after that, the next character after that was a bard named Mr. Shanty who was actually whose goal in life was to make the world a better place through song. So you can sort of see how the character that this person was playing transitioned from someone who was very antisocial to someone who wanted to be social to then someone who was successfully social.
That's really cool. And so I'd be curious to hear too about do you have any parents that have stepped into this because I think it's changing, but there's still a stigma about D&D, right? Amongst certain parents who think of it as they may not. I think there's fewer people now who think of it as demonic or something, but there are people who think of it as I don't know, childish at best and a waste of time at worst, right?
I mean, absolutely. And honestly, we do still very occasionally run into people who still have a little bit of the scare from the 80s satanic panic period. We are fortunate that we
and they come to you because they're well, we've tried everything else, so we may as well try this.
Might as well make a deal with the devil.
Might as well, right?
Yeah.
Might as well. Got no other options besides Satanism at this point.
Right.
Most people who feel that way don't ever come to us.
Right.
There's sort of a selection bias where people who think about Dungeons and Dragons as being bad for you at best, they just don't contact us.
But we do we run tables at fairs and cons and give a lot of presentations both in the Seattle area and around the U.S. And so we do occasionally run into that kind of perspective in some of those settings. Actually, on one occasion we were running a table at a homeschool fair, and homeschoolers are a really interesting group because there's a wide divide of perspectives of why to do homeschooling. There's lots of people who do homeschooling because they believe that the schools aren't educating the way that they would like for them to be educating, and they really want to have a different style of education, and so they homeschool because of that. And then there's lots of people who homeschool because they want to have a certain amount of sometimes a strong cultural or religious perspective that they want to ingrain in their education for their children. And so it was very interesting to do the homeschool fair where we had dice and Dungeons and Dragons books all kind of laid out on our table, and we had some people who would walk by and be like, "Wow, that's amazing!" And their kid might be wearing like a Spider-Man costume walking around the homeschool fair. And we had other people who would walk by and like give us the stink eye while we're running this. But one person in particular really stood out. We had a child, a young woman who was coming by probably about middle school age, and really was so excited about our booth and came up and rolled dice and chatted with us for a long time, and then said they didn't think their mom would ever let them come to a group like ours. And we said, well, why don't you bring her back? We're more than happy to talk with her. We're always happy to talk with just about anybody about this, and maybe we can convince her. And she said, okay. And at the end of the fair, the mom came by and said, so tell me about this. And we explained what we do using Dungeons and Dragons to help social skill growth. And she told us a story about how I think it was her sister or something, was corrupted by Dungeons and Dragons and Satan in the 80s. And never recovered from that, and how impactful it was. And she said, I don't mean anything offense to you. I don't know you from Adam. And Adam and I are wearing name tags that both say Adam on them. Right. And so we just both at the same time pointed to our name tags. And she said, well, you know what I mean. But needless to say, she did not enroll in which is unfortunate because I think her daughter would have been a great fit for the group and would have really benefited.
I'm 34, I think, and I grew up most of my like early adolescence was in the 90s, and being from Texas, there was still a little bit of satanic panic when I was playing D&D in the mid 90s, and I learned how to play largely from my older brother, and we played at Boy Scout camp. And there were times at Boy Scout camp where we would be playing, with our lantern in the tent at night. And the scoutmaster would come over to the tent and shake the tent and say, are y'all doing that devil stuff in there? You quit that devil stuff. And we'd have to like throw our dice and our character sheets under the cot that we were playing on. And
that's funny.
He didn't even know what it was called.
Just that devil stuff.
Just devil
stuff. Yeah.
That
and Magic the Gathering were both my sort of nerdy things that we did at Boy Scout camp.
I can't remember if I've told this story on here before or not, but like I didn't grow up like religious or anything. Like my parents weren't, we weren't Christian or anything like that. And they still like thought that it was devil worship or something, which was really weird. Like I remember, playing in like 8th grade and they had this freak out because I was doing it secretly because I wanted to play.
Naturally.
And that was so, it's still weird to me to think about like that they were still susceptible to this idea when it's like we weren't Christian.
What do you say to somebody who's like skeptical of it? Like obviously there's going to be people who are so skeptical of it and think it's like demonic or something, and you're not going to get very far with them. But have you had conversations with someone who's sort of like on the fence? What do you and sort of willing to hear you out? Like what is your spiel, as it were, to ease people's fears about it?
Yeah, we do talk with lots of parents who have heard of the game of Dungeons and Dragons before, but have never really seen it or really know what what it looks like to play a game like that. And most of the time, I feel like a lot of the hesitancy around games like that is really just that they don't know what it looks like. I think once you get an idea for what the experience really is, it's hard to think of it as a devil worship game. I mean, you're literally sitting around a table and making jokes and telling stories together, and that's not only like not like sacrificing small animals, but it's also like a human experience that stretches back ages of us sitting around a campfire and telling stories. So most of the time, what I do when I'm encountering that, first I always want to assess for knowledge. So I always ask, what do you know about it? Have you ever played Dungeons and Dragons? Have you heard of it before? And a lot of times the response I get is, oh, I've heard of it, but I don't really know much more than that. And so then I say, well, so Dungeons and Dragons is a game where there are no screens, there's no computers involved. It's everybody sitting around a table with pieces of paper that tell them things and books that tell them rules about the game. There's one person who acts as the sort of, it's a storytelling game, so there's one person who acts as the sort of head storyteller, but
that's a better term for skeptical parents.
Dungeon Master sometimes goes over poorly. But I will say they are the head storyteller, sometimes referred to as the game master or dungeon master. But that head storyteller is also the referee. They know all the rules to the game and they help navigate some of those rules. And they describe stuff that's happening in a world. And all of the other players at the table are playing a single character in that world where they're going to describe what their character does given different circumstances. And then I give an example. And the example is a really important part because, frankly, it's hard to picture Dungeons and Dragons without seeing Dungeons and Dragons. And the example is usually something like, so the Dungeon Master might say something like, you're walking into a cave. You've heard that there's a great treasure that was buried somewhere deep in this cave, and you have taken it upon yourselves as a group to try to track down the treasure and claim it for yourself. And so as you're traveling deeper into this cave, you can see there's stalactites in the ceiling that are dripping water down into the damp, moldy cave. But as you travel further in, you can see parts of the cave have been dug out. As if man-made tools have dug them deeper, almost like a mine shaft. And you travel further and further, and eventually the cave opens up into a large open cavern. And there you can see that there's a large pit in the floor. And across the pit, the cave continues down deeper into the cavern. But clinging for dear life above the pit from a rope appears to be a small gnome. And the gnome looks at you as you crest into this cavern, and he has surprise and joy lights up on his face, and he says, "Oh my gosh, thank you so much! I'm so glad you're here. Please save me." And then the Dungeon Master says, "What do you do?" And the players then have an opportunity to describe what their characters do in regards to the situation. And they have a piece of paper that describes what kinds of things their character can do, like how strong they are or what equipment they have. And so they might try all sorts of different things to accomplish this task. A fighter or strong character might leap across the pit and try to grab the gnome on the way across, or a dexterous archer character might shoot an arrow with a rope across it and sort of tightrope walk across to help the gnome, or a wizard character who can cast magic spells because this is a world that exists with magic spells, might cast a spell that like gets the rope swinging so that the gnome can jump off on his own. And that kind of creative problem solving is a big part of what we want to encourage, as all the players are working on a team together to overcome some of these challenges.
That's great. Yeah, I think that's probably not how I think a lot of people, parents especially, don't realize that that's a huge part of Dungeons and Dragons. And so, and a huge part of games in general, like they're about creative, a lot of times they're about creative problem solving, and there's so much value to both storytelling and games, and Dungeons and Dragons kind of combines both those things in a unique way.
Yeah, we do a lot of consultations with people who are asking us how to start programs in their locations that's similar to ours, and the advice we always give everyone is to make sure you're speaking the language that the person they're speaking to needs to hear. So when we first started, we had to learn this the hard way, where we were first starting the organization we ran before Game to Grow, and we went to talk to a PTA, and we tried to tell them about Dungeons and Dragons, and the response we got was thanks but no thanks. And so we had to learn the hard way, and it was very it was tough. It was a tough time to push through some of that those voices of doubt, because we were struggling. But what we learned is that people want to be told stories. People want to see their particular person they have in mind through the story that we tell. So in the context of a parent, they really want to hear a story about how a kid is connecting and playing with their friends. A lot of the parents that are interested in our groups, their kids don't have friends. They don't have a social group. They don't have people that they want to connect with. So we can paint a picture of kids who want to come to a social group and who might have an opportunity to exchange contact information with like-minded kids. That's a huge selling point for parents. When we're talking to therapists, we can oftentimes say, imagine a world where a young person wants to go to a social skills. Imagine when a parent, a kid who wants to go to therapy, that's a big deal. And when we talk to teachers, it's oftentimes about this is going to help the kids be able to work together better. We're going to help kids not have to leave the classroom when they get frustrated. We're going to help them build their frustration tolerance, and we're going to reduce office referrals by helping them figure out how to deal with frustration and handle conflict.
Not to mention, be excited to actually come to school each day, or especially the days where they're going to have their Dungeons and Dragons group, because they don't want to miss that opportunity and are willing to sit through the challenging or boring classes in order to get to that.
Especially they're going to have somebody to sit next to at lunch now. They're going to sit next to the people that they play D&D with.
Yeah, work on their character backstories.
So at the very beginning of Adam 2.0's pitch, he said something about without screens. I wonder how many parents are sold right at that minute. And exactly what you're doing when you say that.
It is absolutely. I will often, when I'm talking to a parent, I will often repeat it several times as well. throughout that little pitch, I will say they're sitting down with a character sheet. Remember, there's no screens at all, so it's just and a pencil. It's definitely 2, I mean, we have players that their only other activity that they like to do is just play video games, and often solo video games. They're just playing a game by themselves, and so coming to the group means they're sitting and chatting with people, and we'll hear stories from parents where they'll say I don't have to convince them to get off the game to come to this group. I don't have to make it a sell. I don't have to bribe them or try to get them on board. I say, we have to leave in 5 minutes to make it to the Game to Grow group, and they're ready to go. And that's an amazing experience for many of these kids. This is enough of a fun and engaging and wonderful social activity that they will give up on those other things that otherwise they will fight tooth and nail to hold on to.
And it's an amazing thing for a lot of the kids to feel like their presence matters. If they do, if a day comes when they're struggling with their depression or anxiety and they decide not to come, I can almost guarantee that the next time they show up, their teammates go, "Hey, we missed you. We needed you. You're our healer. You're our fighter. We didn't have anybody who could do ranged attacks." So even if it's purely mechanical to on the outside, it still feels really good for a lot of people to be missed, to be wanted, and for a lot of our players, that doesn't happen at school. It doesn't happen in the community.
The thing I keep thinking about as you guys have been sharing about your experiences doing therapy through D&D is that I can't help but think there's a lot of adults that would benefit from this. I'm sure I assume there's probably some people. Have you guys done any of this with? I'm sure there's people out there doing that. Or have you guys done any of the same kind of things with adults?
Our groups actually range in age all the way from 8 up to early 20s. So we've seen some sort of emerging adults within our groups. There's sort of an additional barrier to entry, and this is true for therapy as well, where a lot of kids are brought in by their parents for that initial piece before they're invested, and the parents are willing to take that hurdle because they see the issues that are going on. Adults don't really do that as much for themselves. They don't really take care of themselves the same way that parents do for their kids.
They say it takes 7 years for somebody before they finally decide to go to therapy. From the first time they think about maybe therapy, when they finally make that first appointment, it takes 7 years.
Yeah, I just, I wonder if there's a lot of people out there who are thinking like, and maybe this isn't true, but who are putting off therapy and kind of have this like biting, in the thing in the back of their head of like, I really should probably seek help. I should talk to somebody. If they knew they could do some of these types of things in like a game setting, in a Dungeons and Dragons setting, maybe they'd be like,
we've actually been, like I said before, we do lots of consultations, and we've done some consultations with school groups where like college groups, where what they're doing with the Dungeons and Dragons group is not even therapy through D&D, but they're providing a social support space where before and after the game they can check in about how life is going, especially for like emerging adults who are going to college and leaving home for the first time and experiencing independence. They can just have a social support space, and then the game is held in a place where there's also resources, so they can go to the student union building, which upstairs is the college counselor, the therapist who's on staff, so they can go to a place every week and they can see the bulletin board that says, hey, if you need some support, check it out. And then over that'll just sort of expedite the process and reduce the loneliness for kids in college. We're also working, part of the goals for Game to Grow in the coming months is to expand our services into other avenues. And so where Adam and I have almost all of our experience has been with, kids, teens, and emerging adults. We're expanding, we're incorporating Jared and Elizabeth Kilmer, who are actually on a panel with us at PAX South, who are using Dungeons and Dragons with kids, but they're also using it with veterans. And those veterans are in ages up to their 70s.
Oh, yeah, I think I heard about that. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. That's really cool. Because I think, like, we live in a culture now, and there's all this research about it, too. And, I don't never know exactly what to make of the research, but there's all these, you see these headlines that talk about how we're more connected than ever before because of social media and cell phones and all that kind of stuff. But like, ours is a really lonely generation where people don't feel like they have close personal friends and stuff. And so, like, when I have conversations with people about that kind of stuff, one of the things I find myself constantly telling people is like join a board game group, like go find some people and play board games with them. Like, if you're, it can be really hard to have like a regular group of friends when you're an adult. I'm in my mid 30s, and that feels, and I have kids, so it feels like really hard to hang out with other people of my same life stage. Like, I got to figure out like babysitting, and I got to figure out, or like ask my wife, like, hey, is it okay if I go out with some guys and do something? Because, we share the burden of raising our children. And so, if people just knew like, hey, we need an excuse almost really these days to like spend meaningful time with people, because we think we are spending time with people online when it's really, it's not the same, So, I think board games and D&D especially provide some really great like opportunities just to
I think
a little bit less lonely, I think.
Experience that we're getting where we're connecting with people online is a very superficial experience. We never get to build those deeper relationships. But when you sit down at a table with people, you get, especially on a regular basis, you get a much deeper understanding of them as individuals. And a lot of that is just nonverbal communication that you get to pick up on. You can tell when somebody is, has a little less patience and frustration tolerance to bring into their game this week. And you can tell when they come in and they're like really excited about something. And maybe even you have a lot of those conversations before you sit down and start playing the games, or while you're setting up the pieces, or even while you're playing the game. All of a sudden you get a chance to connect over personal things and personal ideas, and find out more about them as an individual, and connect in a very human way. And that's just, playing Monopoly together. You can get some of that experience. I don't recommend Monopoly, but you can.
Yeah, well, let's
You just triggered Chris.
Yeah. I actually love Monopoly. But that's because
Do you really?
well, yeah, but that's because I'm super competitive and an absolute
You scored.
D-hole anytime I play games. So here's what here's my logic, and this is logic probably. I can't be mean in real life, you know. I need to be like a good person. But man, the gloves are off if I'm playing a game. Like I'm going to be just backstabbing son of a gun. Do whatever it takes to win.
Yeah.
And Monopoly is perfect for that.
I can attest that this is true. Having played Secret
Adam
Hitler
Johns
Chris
can
many
attest
times.
that I'm the same way when I play games.
Adam and I have played a few times in personal games with each other. And in one game that we played, a game of Dungeons and Dragons that we played together with some friends. I was the dungeon master, and Adam was playing a character that was sort of a shapeshifter and could change his face and be whoever he needed to be in a moment, which was perfect for him because then he could just use whatever goofy character voice he wanted to use or whatever. And he mostly used that character to be so mean to all of my NPCs. Like the entire time, and Adam is just the nicest guy in the world. And so watching him like play a character where I would be like a shopkeeper or something, or I would be I think I was a lime salesman at some point. You were like shopping and you found a lime salesman.
We needed limes for something.
You needed limes for something. And the lime salesman was just like, hello, welcome, come and buy my limes. And Adam just berated him like crazy.
You call these limes?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't. Are you unhappy with the limes?
They look more like lemons.
Well, these are sort of
salesman.
And what was great about it was I super enjoyed it because I would just let all of my characters be terribly berated. And that was just a part of the exchange. And it was a great opportunity for Adam to like get out some of that stuff that he doesn't get to have in other parts of his life.
It was a catharsis character for me. At the time I was working. It was before Game to Grow had been fully funded, so Adam and I were both having other jobs. So in addition to running therapeutic social skills groups, I was also a full-time 4th grade teacher. So all of my life was about caretaking and about being super nice and taking care of everybody. So like just to be horrible for the sake of being horrible was just like a great catharsis. And Adam and I were playing. There was never any hard feelings between us. It was just like I was just being super mean to all of his characters. That was actually a super interesting character that I got to play too, because part of being a teacher and a group facilitator and somebody who's in a therapeutic role is that we're oftentimes wearing masks. That's what we do. We are the person we need to be for our clients or for our students. And my character was that person. My character could transform at will into anybody he needed to be to meet the situation. And that's like totally something that Adam Davis does in his personal and professional life a bit too much. So it was interesting to go on that character's journey where Elbryn Moonshadow, his like deep down character arc was that he never showed his true face to anybody, which is sort of how I was living in my both personal and professional life. So the character arc for Elbryn ended up being that he eventually showed his real face to his teammates. And that was like a huge moment of character arc where it was like emotional for me as a personal human being to be like, this is me, everyone. Here I am in all of my like ugliness and because Elbryn was a Jabrin who had like pointy Baraka from Mortal Kombat style teeth, and he was kind of grotesque looking, but it was like part of the sort of therapeutic journey that I personally was getting out of that character was like, hey, this is me. Sometimes I'm not beautiful and sometimes I'm not nice, and this was me.
There was a great moment in that campaign where the moment where you decided you were going to show your real face was like all the characters were meeting back up again. It was actually the start of a new campaign, and Elbryn came in, and then I think one of the other characters responded to him by saying like, Elbryn, is that you? And he was like, yeah, and they were like, well, come on over, come sit with us, have a drink. It was like this great like sort of pause moment of like, of course you should come be by us, even though you don't look like the Elbryn the way that we remember you looking.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear about, because we talked about how games give us the opportunity to be different than maybe we would be in real life and to experiment with some things. And Adam Davis, he talked about this on the panel at PAX South that I attended, the one on avatars. I think there's like a lot of, because we have a good bit, we told you this before, we have a good bit of Christians that listen to this podcast. And I think there's some fear amongst like some Christians that's like something you should never do. Like you should never be mean in a game, or should never like be anything other than like your best self or whatever in when you play a game.
I'm screwed then.
But I think like I'd just be curious to hear you guys respond to that, because I think, you know, you seem to see some value in like pushing yourself to be a bit different, or to experiment. Like these are spaces where we can experiment with what it would be like to be, you know, to have a different persona, or, you know, even to do some things that maybe like from a quote unquote like Christian worldview or whatever wouldn't be considered moral, right?
Sure. In the context that I was playing Elbrinn, it was about catharsis largely.
Yeah.
In that case, I don't want to be mean to the kids. I have no desire to do that at all. It's just exhausting. It's tiring. That's like the sort of burden of someone who lives a life of service. It's hard to always hold space for somebody else. That's
oh,
it's
trust
exhausting.
me, I think there's a lot of teachers that
Yeah.
totally relate to that.
Totally. That's the calling, right? That's the calling.
Yep.
And the calling is a life of service, but it's exhausting. And sometimes it just feels like it's just catharsis. And I don't think there's anything fundamentally wrong with that in that context, especially when it's in the sort of safe container of a game where nothing's going to leak out or bleed out into the real world from that necessarily. And it's important for people to stick up for themselves too. So there is definitely a sense through which I can translate sort of a metaphorical, allegorical shift of like, hey, Adam, sometimes I'm speaking to myself right now. It's okay to be yourself. Sometimes it's okay to express your anger, or express, like, set some boundaries, those kinds of things, which I was expressing metaphorically through Elbrinn's like being mean, or being not being flexible at all. Some of those things are like things that are worthwhile for me to experiment with. And Adam and I had established a safe space, and especially with the rest of our group members who are like my wife and our close friends. It was a place where we were all just playing, and that there wasn't anything that I was like being mean to Adam, and then Adam was having to talk to me afterwards and say, hey, like, I didn't like that. I felt like the lines were blurred or crossed or something like that. So we had that's a really important part of it is there's a concept that sometimes is used with people who are using games in this kind of way, which they refer to it as bleed, where things sort of have a blurred line between what's in the game and what's outside the game. And that's going to happen no matter what. You're always going to have some sort of crossover, some blur between reality and game. And the more you can look at it, label it, and name it, the better. There's also something to be said for consequences and what consequences are. And sometimes consequences can be rewarding, or they can be punishing. And if I am the game master and I see like a young person playing with consequences, that's what they're needing. They're needing to establish that their actions matter and that they're doing something that has an impact on the world. That's a big developmental leap for young people to realize that they matter and that their words matter and that people care about the things they want. So when they want to steal something or burn a building down in a game, I could reward that by saying, it's awesome, yay, you can steal things. And that might be a bad thing to reinforce for their real life, to not care about what other people think and feel. But in the game, if they do that, then it's my job as a game master and sort of a molder of young people to show what happens.
I'll also add in, just in the idea of masks, that a big part of that experience is about the exploration of who you are. This is something, I mean, it comes up much more in middle school and high school age kids as they're really trying to figure out who they are as people. And the opportunity to try on what does it mean to be this kind of person, or what does it mean to be this kind of thing, that's very significant. We don't get a lot of chances to just be someone else for a little while and see what that's like. And that opportunity is both important for being able to understand other people, but is also important for being able to figure out who you are and what's important to you. So many of the characters that we play when you come in and you act in a role or take on a role of something else, they're an opportunity to continue to grow and improve yourself. There's obviously a lot to be said for what it is to be a good person, but as humans, I think we're on a journey to figure out how we improve or how we grow constantly throughout our lives. And that's not always an easy question to answer. It's not always easy, not only to make the right choice, but to even understand what the right choice is. And there's a lot of gray area for the differences between people. I can point to a lot of people and say those are good people, but they're different and they come about their perspectives very differently. In order to discover those things, it helps to be able to put on another face for a little while and say, oh, okay, this is what it is to have that perspective, or this is what it is to have that understanding.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I think, as you do that, I think you'll discover things about yourself. And it's not like, I think there's this fear amongst some Christian folks of like, if my kid like experiments with, playing, I don't know, some game as an evil character, then they're gonna want to be evil, and like they're gonna go do evil things in the real world.
My response would be, did playing cops and robbers as a kid make you want to be a robber?
Right. Yeah. No, that's exactly right. Like, I think we all have done that, and play gives us those opportunities to do those kinds of things in a safe place, and we figure out, I think most kids, when they do that, they figure out like, well, I don't want to be that way in the real world. Like, it actually has the opposite effect, it seems. So
and many times when we see this is something that sometimes comes up with parents, they aren't watching their kid play the game, and they we'll sometimes hear stories about stuff that happens in the game, and there's combat in the game, and sometimes the players are fighting against hordes of bad guys or things like that, and the parents hear about some of those things and want to know what the context is, and a lot of times that's
right.
The real root of many of those things are an opportunity for choice, an opportunity to have power, an opportunity to impact the world in a significant way. And those come out through the game and being able to, defeat your foes. But they're really about the exploration of like, what does it mean that I can impact the world?
Yeah, definitely. That's cool. Well, I really enjoyed chatting with you guys. It's I love what you guys do. I'm thrilled that we're exposing our listeners to these ideas, and what's a way like someone can get involved in what you guys do?
So if you want to know more about Game to Grow, you can go to gametogrow.org. We have on there a lot more about the groups that we run, some of our previous podcasts and panels we've been on are linked to from our website. There's also a contact us page if you have any questions or you want to get some more tips and tricks for how you can make your own life or your community better through gaming. Send us a message. And there's also a support page. So we are a 501c3 nonprofit, and you could help us not only keep the lights on, but help more kids. If you can make a donation, or even changing your Amazon to smile.amazon.com can go a long way.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. Very cool. And you guys are both on Twitter. Do you want to mention like your Twitter or any personal like places people
Our
can find
main
online?
Twitter for Game to Grow is at Game to Grow, Game to Grow. You can find me, Adam Davis, at Sparks for Sharks.
And you can find me, Adam Johns, at Adam Johns is actually just my name. I was an early Twitter.
I was not an early adopter.
Rolls
Adam Davis, believe it or not, was very taken.
Yeah. I on Twitter, I thought it was cool back in the day to put the year of my birth. So Drew Dixon 82. If you want to do the math, figure out how old I am, you can do that. Chris is not on Twitter because he's lame. No, he's probably just smart.
That's what it is.
Chris wants to have genuine and deep connections with people rather than...
That's right. Get rid of the screen.
A socially mediated experience through technology.
He'd rather just play Twilight Imperium with people for 7 hours.
That's a deep experience.
That's Chris. Yeah. Yeah. It is a committed experience, that's for sure.
Hey, some of us are trying to live our best life now, so...
Yeah. You can follow Love Thy Nerd on all the social medias. Just search for at Love Thy Nerd. We also have a really great Facebook community called Love Thy Nerd Community on Facebook. So if you want to go talk to nerds about nerdy things, that's a great place to do it. We have a podcast network that you should check out. We have Free Play Podcast, which is kind of a general nerd culture podcast that gets into all kinds of stuff. Also kind of keeps you up to date of what's going on in the world of Love Thy Nerd. Then we also have the Pull List, which is our comic book podcast, which is also really great. So go follow all those. Go rate and review us on iTunes. That would be hugely helpful for us. And also, please just spread the word about this podcast, about Love Thy Nerd on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, whatever else you use. Snapchat. I don't know. What are the kids using these days? Snapchat. Yeah, go tell people on Snapchat. So, we don't really have a Snapchat. I'm scared of it. So there you go. And that's basically it for us, I think. So, thanks, Adams. This was really great.
Thanks for having me on.